Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Dan, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, two Dans with beards.
I know, from the East Coast.
Yeah, exactly. And we've known each other since like 2016, and we met in Bangkok, which makes me sound way more interesting than I am.
I think that's interesting. I thought it's super interesting. Agency guys hanging out in Bangkok at a conference for nomadic, traveling, location independent types.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Exactly. And then, staying at like the Conrad, which is pretty much like the nicest hotel you can stay in for probably like $100 US a night, which is
at the time.
Has it gone up? Yeah. So,
but still the best value in town. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, hands down. And with that, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk a little bit about your background for those that don't know you from a high level?
Yeah, absolutely. So the quick TLDR is I started an e-commerce business in 2007 using a combination of web marketing and outsourcing to China for our manufacturing, selling things like industrial furniture and cat furniture. And at the time, we couldn't afford necessarily to hire people in America to do the work. And so we were just starting to hear about things like outsourcing to South America and the Philippines based on, the understanding that we got from manufacturing in China. You're sending PDFs via email to these people you've never met, and they're doing things, and it kind of opens up your mind. Well, could we do that with our websites? And I know it sounds crazy now, but that was like, wow, that's a thing. That's an opportunity. And so I thought it was so cool that we were growing this e-commerce business that way that I started a podcast talking about it. And that's called the Tropical MBA Podcast. And every week we'd sort of talk about, hey, isn't it crazy that you can like manufacture in China, you can do web marketing in the Philippines, and you can have all your clients in the US, and you can build a sales team in South America, or affordable state of work at home moms, in tertiary cities in the US or whatever. And so we would talk about these sorts of topics every week. And eventually the podcast spawned its own business, which is now a recruiting agency, a job board, and a community for high-level entrepreneurs.
Yeah. If you're listening and you don't know Tropical MBA, I can't recommend it more highly. And I think I've listened to it probably since 2016, sometime around there. And the coolest thing about it, and it sounds cliche, but it's so rare, the level of vulnerability and openness that you have on that show with yourselves, when you and Ian are just kind of jamming on stuff, and also with guests where you really get people to kind of like open up and talk about works in progress, as opposed to just, hey, I crossed the finish line and I have this shiny new object that's all done, and here's all the money I made on it, and here's how you can do it too, which is usually prone to all the cognitive biases, right? Like hindsight bias, all that stuff. So I just wanted to give you big kudos there. To go back in time, because you started the show in like 2009, I think, before like anybody had shows. What was it like back then? Like, what were your goals to the podcast? How did you think about it at that time versus now?
Back then, you would go to like iTunes on your laptop and you would like download a podcast, and then you would connect your iPod and you would transfer the podcast. And then you would be like, well, now I can go for a walk. It was like a whole, 10-minute process to select a show. I started a show mostly because of my love of drive time radio, actually. And so then when I heard about podcasts, it wasn't a big leap, but like it immediately made sense to me. I was like, incredible. You mean I just don't have to listen to like Howard Stern or Tom Likas, or if I'm living on the West Coast or whatever, I can listen to anybody. I remember in particular, there was this one show that I still can't track down. It was like some guy in upstate New York who had an SEO agency. And it sounded like he was like talking into his telephone, but he was talking about when he would get a client and how he would do it, or what he was thinking about pricing. I was just so hooked that my life outside of my 9-to-5 really became about just listening to podcasts. And I think it was those authentic voices that resonated the most for me. Is like, I want to hear these stories that are duplicatable and in progress. I'm not interested in, hearing the pitch for your book or for your course. And I think that the idea that you could have this kind of pirate radio that did that was really a life changer for me. So that it was kind of a no-brainer when we had our own story to tell that we would start our own podcast.
Yeah, that's cool. And it definitely is similar to my journey, because I did college radio and had like a hip hop show in the woods at UC Santa Cruz, and we would have like guests on from Oakland and everything like that. And probably there were like 20 people listening at a given like 11:30 p.m. slot or whatever. But yeah, and then I think at that time I was like, oh, this is kind of natural to me. I'll do that, and it made a lot of sense. And I guess
can I say something soapboxy real quick, just to interrupt? Because my sense is there could be some agency owners listening and thinking, well, cool, you guys are radio guys. Good for you. You have a podcast. That's a thing that radio podcast type people do. I personally can point to some examples of people making wonderful money that only like a few hundred people listen to their podcast. And you can make a big impact with a podcast that simply sits on your website, and visitors would download a 30-minute audio and listen to, say, the story of your company or product or a case study that's an audio. And so if there's any part of you that's sort of like, maybe I could do a show, I would encourage you to try it out, because there's no medium that I've yet seen that's more powerful than an owner of a company speaking directly into your ear about what that relationship with them might look like. So I just think it's just so powerful, and you don't have to have some big show or some radio thing to make this medium work. And I continue to see success stories. Everybody thought it was over in 2012, and then it was over again in 2016, and then it was over again. It's just, I think there's still never been a better time to start a pod. So that's my soapbox moment for the show. Go for it.
No, that's a good soapbox, and please jump in with more of them as you think of them. I can't agree more, and because I don't think it's really about quote unquote podcast. It's really about like audio as a medium, which is ancient and the first thing that we ever experienced as humans to communicate stories, and is probably timeless. So I think that's definitely true. And I guess like zooming forward now, so more than 20 years or 10 years rather since you guys started. How do you think about it now? And to give a little more context, I get lots of questions just like, hey man, how long did it take for you to start getting leads and business from the podcast? And I was like, well, probably like 6 months, maybe a year. But I don't even know if I was thinking about it like that back then. I think I was like, I'm having conversations anyway, might as well record them. I need to be putting out content because it's just a long-term thing that you need to do for lots of reasons. So check the boxes. But how do you think about it now, and like what the purpose it serves with all the brands you guys run?
Well, to answer the first implied question, which is start a podcast that serves the smallest effective audience possible. So the minimum effective dose is interview your leads. Yeah. And find a value proposition for them to be interviewed. It's like, hey, you could potentially use my service. Can I talk to you can I interview you for an hour? What I do is I get this knowledge, I create these sorts of assets, and then I mail it out to these 100 people that are my former clients, and they get inspiration from your story. And that's why I do what I do. So there's your minimum effective audience. I know a gentleman who does a podcast for guys like you, like guys that are running companies that had tremendous potential. And he does these mindset accelerators that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. All he needs is for the people on his Facebook feed to listen to his podcast. And then they talk about it to their friend at their next social gathering. And he's getting really meaningful business from that. Like that's a 7-figure business. And so I think it really depends on who your audio targets. If what you want to do is create a show about rap music or the NBA, which are two of my favorite things in the world, well, you really need a lot of people listening in order to have that be an effective show. So I think it all just depends who's listening, why are they listening, and what problems are they trying to solve.
Right. And how are they consuming content and everything? Like what I find interesting from just, working with agencies who then are working with all sorts of different industries is just like the amount of surprises I encounter about different niches and how they need to be marketed to or sold to. Like, for example, we have a client of ours that is selling into private equity, and these guys just trade white papers all day. It's all PDFs, right? They're just bouncing around PDFs. And that's like the thing they have to do to break in.
Don't assume that because they have one modality that's dominant, that they're not interested in a pod. Because typically what you're going to do is a pod producer is going to get the studio and like they think it's Joe Rogan or whatever. And actually it could just be that no one's done something that niche yet. Hey, here's a 30-minute story about how one portfolio identified 3 distressed SaaS companies and purchased them at 50 cents on the dollar. Here's the PDF transcript and here's the audio. And then it could just go to that next level where that PE guy who listens to Rogan and is like, oh, it's an audio version. He listens to the first 5 minutes and he's like, that gentleman sounds like someone I could work with. And now your money, baby. That's what you're looking for, right? Is podcasting has this incredible ability to like connect people who share like values that are hard to put words to.
And it's powerful as well because ultimately the sales medium that most people are going to have to encounter, at least like when we're in this B2B world, is voice and video to even a lesser extent. So you're already getting there. So couldn't agree more. And I think tied to that is, what's the correlation between your favorite personal episodes that you've conducted and the most successful episodes you guys have run through the years?
They become favorites in retrospect because they're popular.
Yeah.
So try a lot I don't know, try a lot of them. And then the other thing that I think tends to be, I'll give you a real example. There's a topic that I've been arguing about with everybody. It's edgy, it's niche, it's weird. And the topic it's only relevant to our niche. It's called, was moving back to America worth it?
Yeah.
And so now people are making memes like, that guy who sits on college campuses with the tablecloth that says moving back to America was worth it, changed my mind. But the thing is like, there's this objection like, well, that's not really relevant to your business. And 40% of your audience isn't Americans. It's going to alienate them. And it's like super nerdy to do like an hour about the details of that. And so there's these genuine conversations of like, that's not a professional topic. That's not this and that. But I can say from our forum that is the most popular topic of the year. People just want to talk about it. They want to hear about it. And so sometimes it's surprising, or the things that you might have a little resistance or emotion about that can ultimately be the most powerful episodes.
Yeah, I really like that. And that's something I think about too, is, what's the purpose of the show? Is it just to give people raw data that they can then go implement? Or is it something else, right? Is it to convey emotion, or to let people know they're not alone, or something else like that? Like, how do you think about that when you're having guests on and you're planning these conversations and so on?
My advice is to trust your nose. I think the podcasts that get forgotten about are the ones who simply churn out episodes in order to meet a goal that they hope they'll meet. And I think what makes stronger connections is when you have a sense of integrity about what you're genuinely interested in. It's very hard to fake podcasts. I think we've both listened to pods where it's like, this person like read about podcasting as a strategy and they're implemented it. As a listener, I don't think you want to be part of an implementation. You want to hear a authentic conversation. And so that can be hard when you're used to being a professional.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that's one of the bigger challenges. And if that's all sounds very daunting, I think you can get around it by telling a story that only you know. And that could be a client case study where they've had extraordinary results that only happened in your firm, in your relationship. But if you can turn that into a piece of media that other firms can encounter, that can be equally impactful as like this sort of emotional side of things, which is like this sense of relevance. Like, I've heard about that sort of strategy and that sort of implementation that you guys did, but hearing it from someone I can relate to and how it worked for them, those episodes tend to do really well as well.
Right. And I think that's especially true for a lot of people listening that might kind of not have like super shiny object style differentiators for their product or service. It's a little bit more abstract. It's ephemeral. It's things that people don't get to appreciate until after they've already worked with, an agency for 6 months or 12 months like that.
Yeah.
But those sort of things can kind of be communicated through the feeling and through the story you're telling on a podcast and all that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to shift gears a little bit to the hiring side. So you started out, in this e-commerce space. When did you know you plant your flag in the ground with remote hiring? Like, when did that become the thing, and how did that become the thing?
Became the thing because we had a problem in our community. So we created a membership site where the listeners of our podcast, a lot of them are agency owners, probably 25%. They joined up in order to basically meet each other and have like a private networking and stuff like that. Like we were hanging out in Bangkok, like you said. And all these agency owners were constantly trying to hire in the forum all the time. And the reason is I think intuitive in retrospect, which is like, you want to hire from your network. Like probably the best way to hire is on Twitter or on your Facebook page, right? It's like, you want someone who like understands what you're on about to refer that to someone in their network. LinkedIn referrals are great. And so people try to use our product as like kind of a easy personal referral network. And it worked really well for them. But also it was getting annoying to have the boards covered up with job ads all the time. Right. And so I just thought, well, I could help the users by ripping out those job ads and making them public. And so in 2017, we did that with a site called Dynamite Jobs. And right now I'd say for like American companies primarily seeking to hire overseas, we're probably like the second or third largest remote job board. We're in the top 4 or 5, basically, depending on like what specific vertical you consider. And we're stronger and weaker at different like kind of specific types of roles. But we ran that until the pandemic. And then we noticed that a lot of especially smaller companies hate using job boards. And so we launched a service called Remote First Recruiting, which is essentially like at different price points, you can do full service recruiting, or we can hold your hand through the process, just to make it simple, because it is kind of daunting if you don't have an in-house recruiter. Going to a big job board where you're going to get hundreds of applications, and you're probably going to go to like 2 or 3 job boards, and you need to use like an application tracking software. And like typically most founders are like, ugh. Therefore, we started our own agency, which was my first. I used to work at a manufacturing agency, but that was my first agency that I ever ran myself, which I always swore I'd never do.
Yeah.
I always said like,
Yeah,
I always said
sure.
agencies were like required founders to be the best possible entrepreneurs. And I didn't want to be that. Like, you know what I mean? It's tough.
Yeah.
It's like raw entrepreneurial athleticism. It's like track and field, you know, it's not like golf where you can just like learn a specific skill and repeat it. You
Yeah.
need to be a true athlete to run a great agency, I think. And
Yeah, can you unpack that more? Like what makes it harder than other stuff you could do?
that's an interesting question, because I think I've always so taken it for granted anecdotally, noting that so many, as agencies get larger, it seems to get more complicated, more difficult. A lot of agency owners want to find sort of a sweet spot, but then it's harder to sell. The multiples aren't that good, and all the kind of common things we hear. Agency owners are always looking for that parlay, that next side project, maybe the thing we can spin off of the agency, the skunk works.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I never hear a lot about, I'm just going to grow this agency to 5 million or whatever. So the first thing you noted in the conversation is often agencies aren't productized. So if
Right.
you don't have a widget that you can just sell over and over, tend to be really sales heavy and really client heavy organizations. And it can be hard to consistently drive margins when your income's lumpy and your delivery is uncertain. And I think they're great businesses, but because of all those variables, you need to be on the stick. Typically, you need to be watching your numbers, managing your clients, making sure the pipeline's strong. And all of those things, any one of those things is an enormous entrepreneurial challenge, but to have to constantly manage them all just to keep the boat afloat, that makes it pretty challenging relative to a lot of other business models. I typically think the value of an agency is the relationships, often the ability to build skill sets, to have exposure, the ability to spin up cash flows quickly. Those are the values of agencies. The downsides are the human labor and capital, the lumpiness of the revenue, and the durability of the business model itself. Agencies are probably the easiest come, easy go. And for reference to your audience who's like shaking their heads at me, I rarely speak to an agency owner that has more than $5 million annual run rate. I'm not talking about New York City agencies or classical agencies. I'm talking about mostly bootstrap founders who are selling their skill set at scale.
No, I mean, I think very few people are going to be shaking their heads at you. And I think that's kind of in the zeitgeist now. I was at an agency conference a couple of years ago, and that was the theme of like every speaker was like, here's how you can spin off your agency into this other skunkworks thing, right? Like monetize your podcast, like, you know, we're probably going to do, and a million other things, trainings and all this sort of thing. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the cash flow thing is big because you really can try other ideas and validate them more easily in an agency context than you would if you were just some dude, you know,
That's totally
off
true.
the street. So I think that has a lot going for it, but I don't disagree with anything you're saying. Yeah.
I think that's totally true. And I think in my case, you know, when we started our agency, it kind of flew out of the gate and was doing really good. We had a really big client. And so like we were doing marketing for the agency itself and like really focused on that. And what I realized when we took a downward turn in hiring in October, our revenues got slashed. We had to lay people off. And then I was like doing the calculus and I was like, well, I earned cash, but I didn't grow like a business that had a lot of equity in, because it, you know, it's not that durable. And so what I thought is, in my organization, that agency is really well situated, not at the top of the funnel, but at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, if you sit at the top of an agency, maybe thinking about how you can become more of a marketer than a salesperson. I think that's a simple way to put it. How can you build a brand around a podcast, a Twitter account, you know, a research organization, a YouTube channel, a high-level networker, or whatever it is that's going to be the thing that makes you that one-of-one organization. rather than seeing yourself at the intake manifold of just like driving clients into that cash flow. Because for me,
Right.
it's pretty comfy at this point. Like my agency went down by 50% in October. Now we're creeping back up.
And sorry to cut you off. You're talking about the remote first recruiting, or
That's right.
Gotcha.
That's
Yeah.
right. We were having, $80,000, $90,000 months, and now all of a sudden it was 40,000. But
Right.
my margins are the same. And
Yeah.
I'm not focused on that pipeline at all. That pipeline is simply a consequence of doing other things. And so that is a way for me, you could call it a cope or a bias, which is
No.
not having to live with that as my identity, that up and down roller coaster of the pipeline all the time, but rather there's a solace and a sense of like commitment and craftsmanship of, well, my job is actually to foster a community, is to create content, is to make connections. And so if that particular agency doesn't monetize those connections effectively in this environment, I can simply pivot the agency or build another one that does similar things or does like things that are happening right now relative to the core asset. So for example, like I basically spun up a coaching agency in October when the hiring market took a shit. You could look at it that way. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, no one wants to hire anymore, but what do they want to do? They need to improve their business. They need to optimize their operations. So literally like 8 weeks later, I launched group coaching, which more than replaced all the revenue that the other agency lost.
Right. And there's also this idea of kind of like sales could outpace your ability to win clients that are a really good fit for the most bespoke part of your service. There's an author named Alan Satonic that I've kind of read recently. He talks about this, how you could actually get to a point where you're winning clients that you have no business servicing, right? Either because they're not mature enough to take you on or whatever, or they're just not a fit for some other reason. So I almost feel like if you have these other brands, you're in like the fortunate position of just saying like, you know what, I'm cooler with this thing coasting along at 40, 50K MRR until we can position it in a way to get it higher and find people that are the perfect fit for it, as opposed to feeling this pressure to take on somebody that's going to make our lives miserable. But how does that resonate with you?
Hugely. It's like, yeah, you want to go up the value chain, ultimately be committed to providing solutions to a certain sort of problem as opposed to running an agency.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden you don't have to over identify with what your agency has done in the trailing 12 months, and you can be focused on what your audience or clients need in the coming 12 months. And, you can see people, it's easier than ever to spin up an adjacent agency. Now's a great time to do it in terms of like the hiring market. There's a lot of knowledge professionals out there who have wonderful track records who are unemployed. So if you're in the digital space and you want to go from hiring to web, or if you want to go from project management, whatever, you name it, there's people out there that are looking for jobs now. And so it's an exciting time to spin up a new vertical or a new service offering in your current agency.
Let's go there a little bit and ask you kind of a more cliche podcast question, which is what are some of those trends? Like, what are you seeing out there with your finger on the pulse?
Yeah, I mean, first off, you're just seeing this massive tech layoff. And okay, it's cool to hear like the press talk about middle management fat and non-value providing Twitter employees or whatever the news headlines or the cool insights are. But the reality is you have a generation of tech workers who worked at prestigious high-level organizations with a lot of operational integrity that don't have jobs right now, or that are willing to take a big pay cut, or that don't trust those kinds of organizations. Maybe they trust the integrity of what you, the founder of a agency that does real things for real clients, they would love the dignity of working for a company like that. 16 months ago, who cares about dignity? You're getting paid what ungodly amounts of money to push papers around at Facebook or whatever, you'll take it. So I think the tech layoffs, hiring people that worked at these great companies, they can bring their skill set into your company. The other trend that I think is interesting is South Americans speaking better English. Just straight up, like just South Americans speak better English. It's like, I don't know, I'm 40. And like when I was 30 and like thinking about business things, people from Brazil and Argentina didn't speak the same level of English. You had to like do the agency of agency thing, right? You had to find the Argentinian who wrangled 20 other Argentinians, and you sort of went that way.
Yeah.
And now you can just go direct to the source. You can go to a job board like Remote OK or Dynamite Jobs or whatever it is, and you can just hire somebody direct because they speak high level English now. And I think that that's a big shift.
Yeah, it's really a game changer. And I was sort of the school of thought, like even before we had the ability to hire really good people, well, we just have to hire the best person we can. And because if it's in the States, probably better English, closer, better time zones, all that sort of thing. And I've changed my opinion on that after doing multiple rounds with Dynamite Jobs, to plug you guys, that have gone really well in Latin America. It's not clearly that everyone's like a huge cut above the US, but it's definitely not worse. It's at least the same, if not better. The arbitrage is better. Like you said, the English being the same is a complete game changer because you have the same time zones and everything. So it really is great. It's really like a huge advantage.
And if you're looking for opportunities, we're talking about spinning up new agency verticals fast. I mean, a lot of business models, like fractional business models, are just dependent on that arbitrage. Like they don't really exist at a small business level if you can't get high level professionals at say $30,000 or $40,000 a year versus 150. Like that's your margin. And so I think that these opportunities continue to crop up, and yeah, I think that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, exactly. And to shift gears a little bit to other interesting meta topics. So you've had a business partner who we both know, Ian Schoen, for a long time. So what's that like? I'm basically asking you the cliche, like what's the secrets of a happy marriage question that I'd ask somebody that's been married for 50 years. Like, how have you guys kept it going?
Yeah, I think having a 50-50 partner we call it marriage model because like no one has the trump card. We've been working a lot on our relationship the past 2 years. And I had a business coach that actually told me like something I think we're both scared of, which is we're at just over a $2 million run rate right now. And he's like, you guys can't both be the CEO. That was basically like, he's like, I've never seen it work. Like at some point, someone's gonna have to be the boss. And we're like, I think scared of that moment, and maybe don't really think it needs to happen. I think that it can both be really powerful in terms of like the first 3 years. I think having a 50-50 business partner is one of the most powerful things. But we've also, I think, suffered a lot of productivity because there's a lot of gridlock. Like you always need to have this like alignment in order to like really move fast. And so I think it has got pros and cons. The best part of having a 50-50 partner is having a partner, being able to like, you have to make a lot of tough decisions in business. And so having someone that 8:00 on Sunday night, you just call and it's like an auto pickup and we're in and it's fun. That's the best. If that conversation, just like in marriage, you don't want to make that call anymore, then that's a good sign that you should maybe get a third party involved to help mediate, to help move things along. And just to recognize that call, that like, if you don't want to make that call anymore, then you got problems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing kind of tied to what you said is business coaches. And I've worked with lots of different coaches over the years in different capacities, and working with a great one now who's like really kind of in the trenches, former business owner that cashed out years, like 20 years ago, and does this because it's fun and probably has like handful of clients, and it's
a great
ideal.
sunset. It's a great retirement business.
Yeah. And I really love that model because it's like, I've worked with other coaches in the past, and it's like, I know what you're doing. You're doing what I would do if I was a business coach, which is like try to scale this into this massive thing. And I get it. There's no other way that would make sense to build a real business out of this. That's not just like a hobby business. So it's like, now I'm kind of conscious of that, unless it's for really specific, here's how to work HubSpot sort of coach or something like that. I'm cognizant of that. But
the difference between like a coach who's trained in Socratic method versus a consultant who's there to sort of tell you what to do and kick you in the butt.
Sort of. I think both things could be useful in different situations, but it's mostly like an incentive thing where it's almost like you want to find the coach that, and the same could be said for almost any business, but you want to find the coach that would do it for free if they had to, or they would do it because it's a lifestyle thing, or they don't have to be doing this because they're going to give you more,
Yeah, I totally feel you. I mean, the last business coach we worked with was in that model. 4-time CEO, 7 to 8 figures each time. And that's what we want to do. And he's in his 70s, makes more money than me, just talking to like a couple people a month. And what a great way to retire. You get to spend a bunch of time doing what you love. And then you get to hang out with founders and teach them what you know. Yeah, that really resonates with me as well. And to weave it into your previous question, if you have a 50-50 partnership, I think you should have an executive coach, because you know how it is when you get in an argument with your partner and like they say something, you're like, all right, that's a 50% weighted comment. And then you have a 50% weighted comment. And like at some point you need like someone who's not invested in who wins to like maybe prod one of the other to say, in order to get to 50%, you would need to operate in a better faith this way, or you need to provide these details. And that's immensely useful, at least in a business partnership.
Yeah, exactly. And something you just said reminded me of a really good interview you guys had recently. I think it was with Tommy Griffith, maybe. He was talking about, hey, if you want to do something, just go find the person that did that and hire them, or talk to them at least, get coaching. It's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
A who problem, not a what problem.
Right. That's big. Solving the who problems is harder, and it's one of those simple, not easy kind of things most of the time. So that makes a lot of sense. To bounce back to the hiring side of this, how much did things change for you guys with COVID? Like for us anyway, I remember being in a coffee shop in like 2017, selling what we do, which is B2B lead gen, primarily for agencies, and having to dance around the fact that we were a distributed team for so long. And then all of a sudden it just became normal, like overnight in March 2020-ish or whatever. How did that change things for you, if at all? Like, how does that change the heading of your business back then?
It's so interesting. I mean, for the longest time, I never wanted to say digital nomad because for me, I thought, well, we're more serious than that. We're location independent entrepreneurs. I was like at a meetup recently, and there was like some 25-year-old guy with a SaaS company. And he's like, oh, you have a podcast. Like, what's your niche? And I said, location independent entrepreneurs. And he just looked at me like, isn't that just like saying entrepreneur? Like how is that even relevant? And I was like, oh yeah, the world's changed in some fundamental ways. There was part of us that thought, because we were doing this stuff for 10 years already, that when the whole world came to the bar we were hanging out at, that we would somehow get some free drinks or some congratulations, or
I'd buy you guys a drink.
It didn't happen.
If I was there. Yeah.
It didn't happen. In fact, one of the negative consequences was we used to be able to offer people location independence as an enormous carrot to work in our organizations, and that became table stakes overnight. And so that was a big impact for us. And then, we had the wage hikes, and that went on for a while there. I guess the takeaway for me is like, when I think back to the beginning of my career through COVID and now with AI and the crypto things, and I just think the rate of change and adaptability is going to continue to go up. And so this idea, particularly in the agency space, that you're going to have this like monolithic butts in seats kind of model, I think it does make sense to move on to more of the expert relationship model, where your labor delivery is much more agile, because it's probably going to change faster in the next 5 years than it had to in the last 5.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know Robert Rose, but he has this great concept called the smile graph, where it's like the value of what you're delivering is kind of like this giant high here, trough, and then it comes back out the other end, i.e. strategy ideas is valuable, implementation not, measurement valuable again, kind of concept.
No, I never heard that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. Tied to that, let's talk about, there's so many, you opened up some Pandora's boxes there of topics we could crawl into if we have time, AI being one of them. But before that, digital nomading, let's go back to that most controversial question, so I can kind of piggyback off of all the measurement you've done and take advantage of it over here. How do you feel about that? Was it worth it coming back to the US for you? How do you, or in that compared to others, and people in the community?
The bigger question then, like, live abroad for a while, which is really less about business strategy and more about a dream and why I started the business, which is when I was working at a manufacturing agency, VP of Ops, 35 staff members, absentee owner for a lot of the time. Spending a month in Bali was an impossibility, just no matter how much money I made. And for some reason, the concept of that just resonated with me. Like there's a sense of dignity and freedom. And this idea that I wanted to spend a month in Indonesia was like somehow offensive, was sort of like a deal breaker for me. And so the moment I started a business, I got the opportunity to start doing those things. And so I wanted to take that opportunity because I didn't know how long the window would be open. It ended up being open until COVID. And when push came to shove, my allegiances laid here in the United States, where I feel most comfortable from a security and freedom perspective. How has it been for the business? I run a small business. So a lot of the money that I used to make goes into my rent, into my car. and to the expenses of living in America. It's a very expensive place to live. So aside from the glory of being in a different culture and like how that affects, your mindset and creates memories and all that great stuff about travel that I think a lot of people resonate with, being able to live a great lifestyle affordably is one of the things I think most about. And then finally, the networking potential. So I think a lot of people, when they think about leaving the US, they're worried about, who they're going to be able to hang out with. And that's a genuine worry. If you want to grow a great agency, I think it would make sense to hang out with people who are growing great agencies. And so maybe the biggest question is just, where are those people and how much time can you spend with them? And I found that, for example, a lot of DCers, this is becoming a thing. So I'll mention it to you. We go to Barcelona in July. And like people bring their families and like, they have pool parties and they go down to the beach together and stuff. And like, if you catch someone in their New York schedule where it's like, hey, 3.5 weeks from now, do you have 45 minutes for a quick lunch at Starbucks or whatever?
Yeah.
We all have a lot of commitments. And so there's also that idea of like being in a group of people that are abroad where they're in a moment in their lives where they're making connections and have time. That's pretty magical and ultimately has led to a lot of my most meaningful business connections, not, the fury of a conversation over a beer at a conference, which just happens in a flash, but actually spending time with people.
Yeah, I think that's really big. And you definitely get more serendipity on kind of like small communities in big cities, because then you're diluted less, but there's still all sorts of stuff to do and trouble to get into and so on.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah, it's funny because I remember like thinking back to like everybody, I read 4 Hour Workweek and that planted the seed and then left a sales job. I think that it kind of created this burn the ships effect because there wasn't another option. There wasn't going to be some agency or tech company that would have let me go to Asia and work from there. So I almost wonder if it was kind of a blessing in disguise because it made me have to start a business instead of just working in some job from a weird place.
Well, one of the blessings for me is like I have a very mixed relationship with the phone. I mean, the phone is the money maker, baby. Like that's the thing. If you got the phone, you can make some money. And one of the biggest things in the digital nomad movement was when Skype created affordable outbound calls internationally. So, I think I did this math at one point where if I had become a digital nomad in 2004, my monthly phone bill would have been like $2,000. But in 2008, that phone bill was $8. And so all of a sudden I saw a wave of people seeking lower living costs and a better lifestyle, leveraging that new technology. But at the time I was living in Asia and my clients were in America. And that meant I wasn't able to live that lifestyle because I would be up late at night or waking up at really early. And it was so disruptive, particularly as like someone in their 20s. Like I wanted to go out every night.
Yeah.
see what's going on in the town. And so what it forced me to do, Dan, is like I would have to build a business without a phone. And I think the phone is this beautiful shortcut, but it can also be a crutch. And so it's like, can you be compelling at scale? Can you be compelling one to many? Because it's really easy to make adjustments on the telephone, change that proposal, tweak that proposal slightly and get it to a 1 of 1. And can you do it one to many? And that was like the real challenge that I faced when I moved to Asia. And that's what the podcast was about. That's what about writing essays was about. That's about having conversations like this instead of conversations where I'm trying to sell somebody something. And I think that combined with the fact that at the time getting things done was in vogue and all these productivity hacks and whether you have note cards or what's your system, and the ultimate productivity system is just living on the other side of the planet, because somehow everything just gets filtered and like the 2 important things when you wake up and you either do them or you don't, and then you get to work. And so there was a beauty to that, and I'm glad I got to spend time in Asia but also servicing American clients.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's not a way that you would actually be able to have the discipline to do that unless you actually lived over there. So that makes sense. And
Dan, I don't know if you can relate to this, but like I feel that when I'm in America that I'm just on all day long. I'm just on. Like I'm on the phone with my team. Like I was on the phone for like 4 hours yesterday, email, Slack all day long. Sometimes after dinner, I'll touch up the Slack so that my morning is a little bit more. And I have to make like a conscious effort to be out of that. Whereas when I'm abroad, there's something about the geographic distance and the time zone that does a lot of it for you.
Yeah, it's funny because I have like really mixed feelings about it. And I'm very ambivalent about the value. Because on one hand, I hear from people that I really respect that have come from like the tech startup world, and they're like standing meetings every single day. If you read like 0 to 1 Peter Thiel's, like you got to be in the same space to do
Yeah.
great things, right? So there's that school of thought, and like that makes sense. And then there's this other school of thought, which is like, hey, I was spent an hour in this meeting. Like, did that need to happen? If we didn't deal with this problem, would it have gone away? It's like probably, you know. So
Yeah.
it's a tough call. Depends on the situation, I guess. I think one, and this is I hesitate to get to this. We won't spend a ton of time on it, given that we're going over a little bit. But you talked about how Skype changed things, taking a phone bill from $2,000 a month to $8 a month. To bring this to AI, what do you see it doing? Where are you with it now? Like, how is it playing around in your business, if at all, yet? And how do you feel about it?
There's some things that I'm super excited for, like personalized bespoke SaaS applications, particularly for your own business, like CRM stuff, accounting, legal. All this stuff is such a pain in the ass to deal with providers. No offense to my friends who are providers. I am too. But I'd much rather just Google my company and know internally like what's happening. Like things like building a pro forma. AI is like maybe a month or a year, a couple years away from being able to do those sorts of projections for you. And there's this sorts of projects that take me days as a human. And so being able to literally put on an Iron Man outfit and have those sorts of capabilities as an individual is really exciting. I'm also concerned that like our lives are going to change so dramatically, and that in a way we're middle-aged. We like grew up with the internet and found a way to live in that paradigm that was pretty magical. And even, there's some things that have eroded that a little. Like I really enjoyed kind of like the early internet era, like a little bit pre-social media. I like the kind of upload content era rather than the instant connective era. But I think maybe with this AI could represent a wall where that was the internet era, that was the laptop era, and we're kind of going to venture into that brave unknown. Imagine describing, 2015 to someone in 1995. And whatever that means to you in terms of an intellectual leap, it's going to be many times more in the next generation. So I'm both like excited for a lot of the applications, but to say disruption, I think is understating it. I think it'll be transformational in our society.
Yeah, I think that definitely could be true. I guess where I'm a little skeptical is like the classic Peter Thiel line, like we got the computer from Star Trek, but none of the other stuff. It's like, right. And there's the great stagnation idea. And it's sort of like, well, what if it just squeezes the last drops of juice out of like the value you get from information exchange? Because it's still, we still don't have flying cars. We don't have any of the other jets and stuff. So maybe does it just become a better Excel spreadsheet at the end of the day?
Yeah,
or
well,
is it going to
the
be
Excel spreadsheet is the powerful stuff, right? Like, we're never going to be standing on the Starship Enterprise. Like, that wasn't what technology wants, and those aren't the parts of the human experience. Like Terminator 2, for example, like you don't need a humanoid robot. That's not what we were building with the internet. So what we were building with the internet, to quote, Kevin Kelly, is like by the year 20 whatever, I forget the precise year, but I think we've passed it at this point. The internet will have as many neural connections as a brain. The internet is itself a sort of a brain that knows things, and that we're uploading our experiences into it. And so I don't think it's surprising that the way we carry intelligence around, that's not necessarily going to be the thing that gets exported into the universe. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I think there's a long tradition of people seeing this happen where, and by long, I mean, the Greeks were worried about it. The Romans were worried about it. Some of my favorite philosophers in the 18th century were worried about it, like, which is like, who runs the show, the tools or the person who's carrying the tool?
Right.
And I think it's going to be a revolution. That's my sense. It's our lives are going to look really different in 10 years. And I just hope they look better.
Yeah, me too.
I think they probably will. I think there's always like these disruptive moments. Like we've already started to see, I don't know if these things are definitive, but maybe political disruption or polarization, or things like young people feeling bad about themselves in ways they hadn't previous as disruptive forces of this new technology. But perhaps if we can get over those lumps, we will have our Jetsons life where beef stroganoff on demand. flying
as long as
around.
it's beef stroganoff. Yeah. Have you read Where's My Flying Car by chance?
No.
I'm about halfway through it, so it's coloring my thinking a lot, but it's good. It's basically
like an anti-case for technology expansion?
No. If anything, it's a pro case, but it's the idea that we should have flying cars and a bunch of other cool stuff by now. And the reasons that we haven't, accidents of history combined with bureaucracy, combined with like cultural issues. It's not a failure to
That's
have the
interesting.
technology or make the discovery to begin with. It's also, like for example, one thing that you can kind of think of, and I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but it makes you think, is the fact that we have nuclear subs that can like go out for 10 years at a time, but it's just like confined to this one domain of like the Navy.
Right.
It's like, can't we do other stuff with that?
Totally.
But anyway, I'm a guy that's read half a book, so
Well, I love that kind of stuff. I mean, a similar book that I love is called What Technology Wants. And there's a lot of these
cool.
arbitrary
Write it down.
decisions that come to this stuff. Yeah. I mean, for the agency owner, I mean, what is this stuff going to mean? I mean, wow. If you really want to press it, I think it's going to be an exciting 5 years, because what one person can do in your organization will probably be magnified quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And just and also just as long as they can combat all the BS, which is, and there's going to be a lot more of that too, right? And a lot more distraction and all these sort of things. So, but I agree, it's definitely going to be interesting. And I think that's probably a good note to end on. And Dan, I guess like to finish things off, what are you working on now? Like, what's the next big project for you over the next 30, 90, however many days?
So for years, we've run this community for founders that have businesses. And for years, they've grown these hyper successful businesses, say 7 figures, sometimes 8 figures. And then they'll go and join another community, because there's a lot of high level communities like YPO, Vistage. They go to Tony Robbins stuff, whatever. They join the Platinum Mastermind.
Walk on coals. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they come back to me and they're like, dude, I wish that DC members, which our group is called the DC, I wish there were DC members in groups like this. And I can talk you through, everybody, I think founders can relate to like head trash. Like there's all kinds of reasons I wasn't doing this that I thought were legitimate. But at a certain point, I was just like, I got to do this. This is undeniable. So we're launching this space in our community called DC Black that's for 7 and 8 figure founders. And it's just like a more discreet, more focused version of the DC community, but for people who've achieved outsized success. And so I was working on the copy, working on the new logo. We haven't even launched yet. We already have 16 members. So
Cool.
I'm just like working on, I don't know, maybe one of the more exciting products we've done in a long time. It's something that I've had a lot of resistance to doing, because I wanted to prove that I was part of the club myself. I think that's part of it. I wanted to make sure that the members that were joining knew that I wasn't just the host of the party, but that I also deserved a seat at the table. I felt that I had earned that. And also, YOLO, I'm 40, so let's do it. That's what I'm working on.
Very cool. And we'll get that linked up. And yeah, I hope there's like some luxurious stuff that goes along with it, like cosmopolitans and riding around in limousines and that kind of thing.
Yeah, very much the James Bond vibe. Yeah.
Nice. That sounds great. Dan, this is so much fun, man. Let's do it again before long.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.